The results are in. Republic of Korea President Lee Jae-myung. Who is he? How did he get here? And what does it mean? These are things we'll look at today in The Impossible State.
North Korea is the impossible state. It's a place that stumped leaders and policymakers for more than 3 decades. It has a complex history, and it has become the United States' top national security priority. Each week on this show, we'll talk with the people who know the most about North Korea.
Welcome to The Impossible State. My name is Seiler. I'm a senior advisor here at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. On the other side of the microphone today with 2 of the world's top experts on Korea to examine the events of the past, in one way, 24 hours, but several months now, in getting to where we are today with a new president sitting in Seoul, Lee Jae-myung. We have with us today Victor Cha, president of the Geopolitics and Foreign Policy Department and Korea chair here at CSIS, distinguished university professor and professor of government at Georgetown University, a member of the Defense Policy Board under the previous administration, NSC director for Japan, Korea, Australia, New Zealand, and Pacific Islands, and just numerous books on the alliance and the peninsula and policy, an individual uniquely equipped to mix together practice, experience, and theory, an important voice to be listening to at this time. Joining Victor is Ramon Pacheco Pardo, professor of international relations at King's College London, the KF-VUB Korea chair at the Center for Security, Diplomacy and Strategy at the Free University of Brussels School of Governance, and also author of a number of books, The North Korea Survival of a Political Dynasty, of course, the Pink Book, The New History of South and North Korea, written together with Victor, and Shrimp to Whale, South Korea from the Forgotten War to K-pop. Thank you all for joining today.
Great to be here.
So for those for those not following this, extremely closely, today's election comes in the light of a number of dates and events I think are important to kind of just review. President Yoon Suk-yeol, who was impeached, as everyone knows, several months ago, was to have served this current term from 10 May 2022 to 9 May 2027. And then in the middle of that, in 2024, a parliamentary election basically handcuffed President Yoon with an overwhelming majority achieved by the opposition party and a resultant kind of stalemate and stagnation in the whole legislative process. In response to that, according to his own profession, on 3 December 2024, President Yoon declared martial law, which eventually led to his impeachment, the upholding of his impeachment, and then the election that we've seen that now President Lee Jae-myung will guide the country for the next 5 years. And we'll have this National Assembly majority at least until 12 April 2028, when we have the next National Assembly. So we have a president of the Republic of Korea, not a president-elect, and we've got a president with a mandate. We'll talk about the results of the election, but also a president who will have the National Assembly behind him. As we look at the names and the results from today, we could see, on one hand, the margin that we have. We could have that graphic up, please. President Lee gaining 49.42%, just short of 50%. His conservative opponents in Kim Moon-soo from the Yoon Suk-yeol's former party with some 41%, 8 percentage points behind Lee Jae-myung. Lee Jun-suk, a less known figure, but nevertheless drawing 8.3% of what was largely a conservative vote, and then finally Kwon Young-guk from the Democratic Labor Party. Before I turn to Ramon, if we go on to the next slide, this is a very meaningful slide, and if you can't read the details, it basically reflects the voter distribution between a very conservative eastern half of the country and a very progressive liberal left side of the country. In those areas which were strongholds for legendary figures going back to President, in particular, Kim Dae-jung, and a stronghold for progressives since then, joined not only that area in the lower left-hand side of the country, but the urban areas of Seoul and the surrounding Gyeonggi-do province, et cetera. And then on the right, the stronghold of the conservatives going back, Park Chung-hee, Chun Doo-won. So with that, Ramon, I'd like you to open up. What can you tell us about your assessment of the voter turnout, the margin that was won by, the importance of these regional trends or other ones like gender or age? What's your read on this election so far?
Well, first of all, I think this sounds like a cliche, but this was a victory for democracy. It was the highest turnout in 28 years. Almost 80% of Koreans went to vote. Also, a big victory for Lee Jae-myung. It's true that he didn't cross the 50% threshold, but this is the second largest share of the vote since the democratic transition of 1987. So only Park Geun-hye in 2015 had a greater share of the vote. Plus, he won across all age groups, from the people in their 20s up to people in their 50s. And if you look at people in their 60s, we normally tend to vote more conservative. It was quite even in the election today. He didn't fare very well with men in their 20s, but every other demographic he did quite well. Plus, it has to be said that in a country in which a third of the voters may self-define as liberal, a third may self-define conservative, getting almost 50% of the vote is quite an achievement. So I think he will be happy with the result. Plus, obviously, the margin of victory, 8 points, means that he can claim a mandate. And I think this will also help him to manage his own party, not only because obviously he will have a majority in the National Assembly, as you mentioned, the first liberal president to have a majority in the National Assembly from day one, from the moment they take the presidency, but also within his own party. I think he can claim that this wasn't a narrow victory and that he can govern in the way he has said he will during the campaign, which is on a centrist platform. Of course, we'll have to see what happens once he takes office tomorrow or already today in Korea. But he can at least claim that he should pursue the centrist agenda that has brought him to power.
Victor, so you've been watching, thank you for that, Ramon. You've been watching Korea politics for a long time. And in some ways, when you look at that graphic and you see the distribution so regionally defined, you can't help but think back on everything we learned in Korean History 101 about regionalism and regionalism, even trumping ideas as they were per se. And even by making this a referendum on the legitimacy, which very few were arguing for, but the legitimacy of the martial law. What are your thoughts about what these numbers might mean and whether there's a ray of hope for conservatism in South Korea based on what you're seeing?
The first thing I would say, I mean, I agree with everything that Ramon said in terms of voter breakdown and the fact that this government comes in and it now has the presidency and it has the legislature, through till 2028, as you said, Sid. So they really have an opportunity to do something. When I look at this map, it reminds me of, I think it's that Talking Heads song, "The more things change, the more they stay the same." Somebody can correct me if it's not Talking Heads, but here again we see like the regional breakdown, Honan provinces, Yeongnam provinces, really sort of lining up as they have lined up throughout history. The big cities also going to the progressives. So there's a lot here that looks quite familiar, even though many of the issues that we've been talking about, martial law, ending this martial law impeachment chapter, finally being done with it. I think the Korean electorate is pretty sick of it. I think they really do want to move on. And so these things are important, but in terms of the way the vote played out, here it looks again it looks very familiar in terms of how the progressives and the conservatives vote by province, by region, how they line up. The other thing that's worth noting is that Lee Jae-myung didn't get over 50%. I mean, he got a pretty high number, but I'm also struck by if we look at Kim Won-soo and Lee Jung-suk's, at least their raw scores, their raw numbers, if you add them together, right, they barely eke out a win, right? It puts them just above Lee Jae-myung. I mean, not that those two could ever come together. I think there are many reasons why they would not go together. There are many reasons why Lee Jung-suk, continued to fight an election he would lose. I think he's trying to build for the future. But the bottom line is that, this election is over. The 6-month nightmare, if you will, is over. And now you have a new president with a legislature that will certainly have their hands full going forward.
Well, maybe apples and oranges at a certain level, but when you look at the appeal of politicization of events, Seiler sinking, Itaewon disaster, other events throughout history that have galvanized, supporters either on the conservative or the progressive side. Is there a way in which, if indeed the legitimacy upon which the mandate is established for President Lee is indeed so tied to martial law, that we would expect to see long drawn-out court cases, accusations, arrest, changes, firing of people in the military, foreign service, et cetera, that it may be to the benefit of President Lee to keep these things going? And then also kind of conversely, what does it mean when, what you just said, 50%, almost 50% of the voters voted for two candidates who otherwise, even if they weren't pro-martial law, would be willing to say, this should be put behind us and we should look forward. What's your thoughts on that? We've lost Victor's volume.
Sorry, I'm muted. Sorry about that.
That's all right.
Ramon and I are both here in Brussels, and it's late, and I'm losing my edge here. What can I tell you? So, so I think on your latter point, I mean, while it does look like nearly 50% voted for, I don't know if we'd say voted for martial law, but voted for the candidates who were not as negative on martial law. I think that there's a lot of that vote, and this can be broken down. I haven't seen the breakdowns yet, and there'll be post-election analyses of it. But a lot of that vote was also a negative vote against Lee Jae-myung, right? Lee Jae-myung is a very divisive character in Korean politics, and so there's a anti-Lee vote in there overall, but that shouldn't in any way tarnish the victory. I mean, it was an important victory for Mr. Lee, and I mean, he's got the ball now, and he's got a lot to do going forward.
So, Ramon, what do you think are you mentioned the mandate that President Lee has, both in terms of his perception of the vote turnout, which justly, gives him the confidence that he did win by a decisive margin, and the fact that he's got the National Assembly. How do you think he would prioritize his actions in the first 100 days, to borrow a framework that we use here so much in the United States? What do we see in the first 100 days out of Lee Jae-myung?
Well, I think if we start with domestic politics, the focus has to be economics. The Korean economy has been suffering over the past few months. Exports to the US, to China, they are down. And I think Victor mentioned this. I think South Koreans are ready to move on from the martial law declaration and its aftermath. And they really want to focus on the future, and the immediate future is economic growth. I think he will deliver on his promises in terms of public sector investment in sectors such as semiconductors, AI, humanoid robotics, 6G as well. I think he will try to meet again with the chaebol leaders. He has done this during the campaign with the Federation of Korean Industries to project a message of stability in the Korean economy. And I think his social agenda probably will come afterwards. I don't think it's going to be the focus on this first few months, first 100 days, because he really has to restore a credible economic growth path for the Korean economy. And this means obviously sitting down with the Trump administration as soon as possible to reach an agreement on the tariffs that not only South Korea, but South Korea along with many other countries is under, because as long as these tariffs continue in sectors such as steel, cars, car parts as well. Now in Korea also there's also talk about these potential tariffs on foreign movies. This could potentially affect Korea as well. So it's not only about manufacturing, it's also about the arts and the Korean wave. He really needs to reach an agreement with Trump as soon as possible to be able to implement at the same time his domestic economic policy agenda. And I think that he will also have to start to reach out to foreign leaders, to foreign business people, to show that Korea is open to business, that it's open to receiving foreign direct investment, because this is crucial for his economic policy plan.
So, Victor, what do you think? Ramon covered a number of the areas that are currently under discussion between the United States and the Republic of Korea. What do you think are the biggest challenges that President Lee will face, and where will he have to kind of either show some creativity, show some flexibility, and what might that look like to get the type of treatment that he's hoping to get from the Trump administration to help his trade and economic agenda? You're muted.
Did it again. So I think the number one priority, of course, is to have an initial meeting with the U.S. president. I mean, we've been in this period for 6 months where the Trump administration has been moving 100 miles an hour, and South Korea has basically been stuck in neutral because they haven't had a government. So making that first contact, I think, is very important. That will most likely take place in a couple of weeks in Alberta, Canada, for the G7, where the two leaders can meet. And so I think that's important. The number one issue, I think, from a South Korean perspective right now really are the Trump tariffs, because South Korea is being affected by the 10% baseline tariff, as Ramon said, the auto tariff, the auto parts tariff, the steel and aluminum tariffs, and the tariffs on Mexico because of the manufacturing they do in Mexico that goes into the United States. Do they have any creative solutions? It's really hard to tell. I mean, I think they've had 4 rounds of negotiations with the interim government. Those really haven't gone anywhere. I think South Koreans are willing to be, my sense is that what I've heard is that South Koreans are willing to be fairly open and flexible because they really want, in particular, the auto and the auto parts tariffs to be eased up on. I've seen some numbers that say South Korean auto exports to the United States year on year are down a huge number, like double-digit percentages, which is just astounding if you think about it. So this in many ways is existential for Korea. And I think that's where a lot of the focus will be. And I think, I think the Koreans are really willing to throw anything into the basket to see what they can do to move the needle. The problem, as far as I understand it, is that any decision on something like autos is not going to be made by Bessent or by Lutnick or by Greer. It's going to be made by President Trump himself. And so that's why you need the leader-to-leader meeting, right? I mean, right now there has been no leader-to-leader meeting. And if Trump cares about an issue, he's going to want to deal with it himself. And so that's why finally having a president and having that president talk directly to Trump becomes very important.
How much of this will involve bundling, to borrow from the rash of life insurance company advertisements urging you to bundle your home, auto, and other insurances together? In other words, what are the linkages as the negotiators sit down between U.S. force presence, special measures agreement, ROK defense spending, and other things. And, you know, what type of fluency will the Lee Jae-myung team have coming in to compete with the United States that's already, you know, hit the road running in all these areas?
So I'll just go quickly and then go to and let Ramon speak. I mean, I think that I think the only way this can get resolved is if the deal is bigger, like if they enlarge the deal by adding in other things, and it could be things really across the board, everything from non-tariff barriers to guarantees on guarantees on not manipulating the currency, to burden sharing, to, you know, who knows? They could be paying for exercises. There could be all sorts of things that become a part of that. And in terms of fluency, I mean, this is a good question, because I could be wrong, but I mean, you know, when you have a 60-day campaign, you don't have a lot of time to do policy prep. In addition to that, you know, there may have been some communication between the lead team and the negotiators for under Han Duck-soo and under the education minister interim president. But, you know, it's a highly political environment. So how much they're really talking to each other, that part of it is unclear. So, you know, my guess is they're going to be starting almost from a clean slate, and they're going to have to grind this out with the Trump administration. And of course, without any certainty that they will be successful, right? Because how you define success is very different in every case. Like, would you define what happened with China as a success? I don't know. With the UK, I don't know. But if Korea is going in thinking, like, I want the 25% auto tariff to be zero, like, I don't know how easy that's going to be to do.
Ramon, thoughts?
I agree. I agree that there's going to be a big bundle, that security issues are going to be part of the discussion as well. I mean, we have seen the UK agreement, and, you know, there has been some criticism, at least in private, in Korea and other countries, that it is too narrow, which means that the UK needs to continue to negotiate with the Trump administration. And I think that Korea is going to try to avoid that situation, which means that negotiations will take a bit longer. I think the Lee Jae-myung team, as Korea, is going to come with its own shopping list. You know, some are saying, why don't we throw nuclear powered submarines into the discussion? I'm not saying that this is going to happen and that the US is going to agree to this, but, you know, since this is a discussion that goes beyond the tariffs, as Victor has rightly described, I think South Korea is going to try to have other things thrown into the mix that go way beyond tariffs and even economic matters. I also do think that Korea is going to be looking at what Japan may be doing, what the European Union may be doing in terms of negotiations, because obviously any agreement that any other country may reach with the US is something that can be applied to them, and vice versa. So I think this is going to be interesting to see, because we have seen, for example, Japan take a step back, pause the negotiation process, and rethink the process. And I think, as I said, I think that Korea will be looking at its neighbor and will be looking at other countries, because I think everyone is taking a bit longer, also because of the domestic politics that we're seeing in the US. You know, at some point there was a discussion in the US or a decision by the courts that these tariffs potentially were not legal. Now, obviously, this is being challenged by the Trump administration. So I think this will have to be followed closely by the Korean side. Having said that, I mean, the US obviously is the biggest partner, and Korea needs an agreement, and I think they have made clear that they want an agreement and that they're willing to make the concessions that the Trump administration is going to be asking for. And I don't think this is going to change substantially under Lee Jae-myung, because of what I mentioned before. If he wants to implement his domestic economic policy agenda, he knows very well, and his team has been saying so in private, that they need an agreement with the US as soon as possible.
And I think every ROC leader since Kim Dae-jung has had the briefing on what happened when Kim Dae-jung first engaged with George Bush and started talking about North Korea policy. It was a disastrous meeting, in part because Kim Dae-jung it just didn't seem well prepared to understand how to go, what President Bush would know, what his inclinations on North Korea would be, et cetera. And at the same time, I think with Lee Jae-myung, particularly during the election, he seemed to be engaging the right people. He seemed to be demonstrating a willingness to partner and to learn. I think, in terms of, there's certainly an element of the disruptive, transformational, kind of transactional approaches of the Bush team, but they're not entirely out of line, or it's not a zero-sum game with Korea. There can be some win-win outcomes, if handled the right way. And so it'll be interesting going forward. We haven't talked about North Korea, interesting enough, since, on the one hand, you look at all these economic issues as top priorities, the pressing ones that really the South Korean people care a lot about. But for a lot of foreign policy experts out there, they're wondering, what can we expect out of Lee Jae-myung and his North Korea policy, and how that would align with Washington's? Victor, you've watched handoffs of policies between one U.S. leader to the subsequent U.S. leader, from one ROC president to the other ROC president. Where do you think we are on the North Korea in particular? What Lee Jae-myung might see as possible, and what would be compatible with what Donald Trump may be seeking to launch?
Well, I think that there may be things that Mr. Lee wants to do with regard to North Korea, and there may be things that Donald Trump wants to do with regard to North Korea. And some of those things may coincide, some of them may not. But the bottom line is that if North Korea has no inclination to come to the table, then there's really not much that we can do. Then we just end up negotiating with ourselves about what would get North Korea to the table. As you know well, what has changed dramatically from 2018, 2019 has been the North Korean position in terms of the material benefits it's now getting from Russia, the security guarantees it's getting from Russia, the return to pre-pandemic plus levels of trade with China, and effectively a major diminution of the UN Security Council sanctions regime. This is a very, very different situation. Now, Mr. Lee, he in the general election, he portrayed himself as more of a centrist, but there still is that core progressive view that there should be inter-Korean engagement and inter-Korean reconciliation. And I think he will continue to make that point and press forward with it. I don't know if there'll be any success, just because, again, the North Koreans are not really interested. They don't appear to be interested in engaging. And all the things that you would think a progressive government might want to do, such as restart family reunions, restart Kaesong Industrial Complex, restart the Kumgang Tourism Project. I mean, it's hard to restart those things because the North Koreans have basically blown to smithereens a lot of those things. So it might be like rebuild it, like physically rebuild it, but then I'm sure you get a lot of taxpayers in the South that wouldn't like that. So, I think they'll probably say things that are much softer in terms of rhetoric than what we saw from the previous government. But whether they'll actually make any progress, I think, will be entirely dependent on if Donald Trump makes progress. And right now he talks about his good friend Kim, but we see really no opportunity for engagement or diplomacy.
Toward the end of 2018, there were what I called at the time two trinities or principles that North Korea repeatedly articulated. The one trinity I called the nuclear trinity, in that there were three demands Pyongyang had of Seoul. Stop cooperating with Washington. This is after the U.S. ROK working group was set up to kind of manage whole issue of sanctions, enforcement and violations, et cetera, involved in inter-Korean exchange and cooperation. To ignore Washington, ignore the nuclear issue. The nuclear issue is not a legitimate inter-Korea issue, and the South should not expect the North to talk about it when the two Koreas are talking at the table. And somewhat related to that, the South needed to not allow sanctions to become an obstacle to inter-Korean exchange and cooperation. So ignore Washington, ignore the nuke issue, ignore sanctions. To his credit, through the end of his term, President Moon Jae-in did not give in to Pyongyang's demands on those. The other trinity is the peace treaty. This is when North Korea says we need an end of war. We're looking to end hostile policy. Arms control starts here as well. The three main elements of peace, which is reduce and eventually halt exercises, reduce and halt strategic asset deployments, and then reduce and eventually eliminate U.S. forces Korea on the ground. These are three standing demands. This is North Korea's definition of peace. And again, with the exception of some tweaking to exercises and reduction in extended deterrence demonstrations during the Moon Jae-in administration, the alliance deterrence emerged solid. Ramon, first I'd like to hear your response to that. I saw these themes regularly, but also what would Lee Jae-myung do in the face of similar demands from North Korea? Does he have flexibility?
I don't see it, actually. I mean, Lee Jae-myung has indicated during the campaign and even yesterday night Korea time that he wants to engage with North Korea, but at the same time has indicated that he doesn't see the resumption of inter-Korean summits happening anytime soon, because the situation today is very different from what it was in 2018-19, and North Korea has far stronger relations with Russia. Now we see a resumption of trade with China, so North Korea is in a different position from where it was before, a few years ago. And he has also emphasized the deterrence component, which, part of the liberal core base won't like him saying so openly shortly after having been confirmed as the next South Korean president. Please.
You came in a little broken at the end. Could you repeat your very last thought there?
He will try to re-engage, among other things, because there's the potential that if the US and North Korea resume diplomacy, that South Korea will be bypassed, and President Trump will reach an agreement with Kim Jong-un, and basically South Korea will be told, this is your agreement, you have to implement it. And I think no South Korean president, including Lee Jae-myung, would want to contemplate this. So I think we'll try to re-engage, but I think he's very much aware that many limits to what he can do with North Korea in the state that it is right now, which, as I just mentioned, and Victor alluded to this as well, I think North Korea feels that it is in a strong position vis-a-vis the US, but certainly vis-a-vis South Korea. That's why I don't see South Korea acceding to these North Korean demands, because I think there's very little for South Korea to gain from this type of engagement with the North.
Yeah, there was a learning curve in 2018 with the Moon Jae-in team, and their optimism may have been justified. Let's say that the events of 2018 were all worth a try, considering where we appeared to be headed in 2017. And skeptics out there who said the thawing, the charm offensive would have a sell-by date, and that eventually the North would turn on South Korea were proved right. But of course, you had a lot of scapegoats. The United States for heavy-handedness, the United Nations Command for not letting products go through, hardline conservatives, NGOs for launching balloons. There were a lot of, excuses given at the time for the failure ultimately of the Moon Jae-in administration's North Korea to yield some of the benefits they had been searching for. But hopefully that, we'll see with the Lee Jae-myung team, individuals who went through that, who learned through it, who learned that there can be value to teaming with the United States, and that I would think even in a kind of the Korea passing fear scenario, handled rightly, the South would not lose a place at the table, even if there was some sudden breakthrough with DPRK-U.S. relations. What about the China relationship? I remember when Park Geun-hye ran for president, and it was at a downtime PRC-ROK relations, not because Lee Myung-bak came in with a real hard line, but because North Korea had done a Taepodong launch, a nuclear test, the sinking of the Cheonan and the shelling of Yeonpyeong. And so Park Geun-hye came in saying she would fix the relationship, ran into the challenges that one would imagine. What are the possibilities? How would he even begin to approach President Lee Jae-myung? What are your thoughts on how he may seek to try to approach a damaged, so to speak, ROK-PRC relationship? Victor?
Well, it's not going to be easy because I think the Trump administration has made pretty clear that the days of hedging, at least for U.S. allies and partners in the region, are gone. Like the notion that countries can, U.S. allies and partners can say, all right, I'm going to do a security relationship with the United States, and I'm going to do an economic relationship with China, and hedge and de-risk between the two. I think actually, Defense Secretary has explicitly said while he was in Shangri-La that no longer is going to be acceptable. Even if it were necessarily acceptable before, calling that out, I think, was a real signal that they were sending. Lee has been pretty clear, vocal in the debates and in his statements that he wants to balance out. I think that was the term he used, the relationship between the United States and China, that under the previous President Yoon, it went too far in the direction of the United States, and Yoon did break new precedent when it came to South Korean statements on defense of Taiwan, as well as on freedom of navigation in the South China Sea. So I think, this is one that Mr. Lee is going to have to finesse. I mean, I think there really is a hard line in the sand that the administration has drawn. And I would say it's not just this administration. I would say on the Hill, too, Democrats and Republicans kind of feel the same way about a lot of this. So they're going to have to find some way to finesse this. And at the same time, there will be some sort of negative externalities if they walk back too far the statements that were made in the previous government. Because those statements, I think, from a U.S. perspective, were seen as very hard fought. And for them to lose that, in practically speaking, it may not make a difference, but in terms of the signal it sends to the United States about which direction the Lee government is going, that's not going to be good for the relationship or for building trust in the relationship.
Well, it seems to me that the ball really, in a way, is in the U.S. court, in as much as thinking back during the Biden administration, how, in particular, we used available intelligence and other assessments of information available to convince partners and potential partner countries of the case on Russia getting ready to invade Ukraine. And similarly, the case we made on what China does that we don't like. This is not, we're not on the playground asking you to join our gang instead of the other. We're looking at nefarious, destructive activities of the PRC that are detrimental to ROK interests. We want the ROK to see the PRC the same way we do. There's elements of that which will be difficult because they're the neighbor with China breathing down its back. We're far away. But there are other areas, particularly in economic security, and supply chain issues, where we share a lot in common with the ROK. But it will be we're going to have to sell and educate so that we raise the IQ on China and explain the logic of our policy. What about Japan, Ramon? What do you expect on the ROK Japan side under the Lee Jae-myung government?
Well, I would expect that, as he has been saying throughout the campaign, really, that he will try to continue the trilateral cooperation with the U.S. and Japan. And I would say to a large degree, because this will help with his economic agenda. I mean, if there is something that South Korea doesn't want right now, is to have economic problems with yet another country after the ones with the Trump administration and and also with China as well, that hasn't really reopened its economy or opens economy to foreign investment in the way that Korean firms would want. And also, it has to be said, I mean, there have been discussions within the HMM camp about potentially submitting a formal application to join the CPTPP, and this would entail obviously having good relations with Japan as one of the countries that would have to accept South Korea as one of the members of this trade agreement. And it also has to be said that if you look at where South Korea and Japan are today, I think it's very different from where they were 5, 6, 7 years ago in terms of cooperation. There may be a rhetorical change. I think some of the historical issues that maybe the Yoon government was more willing to put aside or not to raise, I think the HMM government will be willing to discuss more openly and to raise. But I think that pragmatism is going to be part of the policy towards Japan. Plus, obviously, there are all these multilateral fora. Victor alluded to this, potentially South Korea, HMM, attending the G7 summit. For example, I mean, Japan is part of it. So there are all these multilateral fora in which Korea is going to be working together with Japan in a way that maybe in the past they weren't there, right? And they didn't help to smooth the relationship between the two neighbors. One last point to add as well is that obviously in Ishiba, we have a Japanese prime minister that is also willing to talk to South Korea, to engage with South Korea. And I think this matters. It matters that, you know, you also have a Japanese leader who actually sees the benefits of working together with Japan's neighbor, which has not always been the case with previous Japanese prime ministers.
Excellent points. I think it's time to wrap up. Make a short 2 sentences each. What is the thing you're most optimistic about given the election of Lee Jae-myung, and what is the thing you're most pessimistic or worried about? Ramon?
Optimistic, I would say that in the end, democracy won in South Korea. You know, 6 months after the martial law declaration, we had an election. Kim Moon-soo immediately conceded when it was clear he wasn't going to win. And Lee Jae-myung made a speech in which he actually talked about unity. And of course, there will be some skeptics towards this, but he delivered the right message. I think in terms of pessimism, this is a tough environment, not only for South Korea, but in the case of South Korea, having to deal with the Trump tariffs, potential discussions about what's going to happen with American troops in the Korean Peninsula, having to deal with a more assertive China a few years ago. This is not an easy situation for South Korea, and Lee Jae-myung has no time really to think about his policy. He has to start from day one looking at potential ways to dealing with these issues.
Excellent points. Thanks to everybody. This is a pretty good discussion we had. Thanks to you, Ramon. Thanks to you, Victor, if you can hear me. Not bad for 6 hours after the election results started rolling in. A lot more to cover, a lot more to think about, a lot more to discuss. There'll be some dynamic days ahead. Tomorrow morning, we'll have a Capital Cable, right? 2 of them? Thursday, Capital Cable on the subject, where we'll dig even deeper. So join us there as well. Thank you so very much. Have a wonderful evening.